So it is my extreme delight to introduce Assemblymember Dr. Shirley Weber. She is with the California State Assembly, District 79. She flew up from San Diego. Thank you. She doesn't usually do early flights like this, but she did. And I wanted to have her come and do a brief welcome. And she is also near and dear to our heart because she was the instigator, should we say that? Yes. Instigator of our California Equity Performance Improvement legislation that led to the improvement program. And so I'm delighted she's here. I've heard her speak before. She's amazing. And take it away, Dr. Weber.
Thank you, Kathy. And good morning. Good morning. One more time, good morning. Good morning. Great. It is truly my honor to be here and to, just as an observer, just to see what's going on with the program here and hopefully to encourage you, to let you know that somebody in Sacramento thinks about you, that I don't just give money and run away, that I do care about what you do. And I do care deeply about the children that you serve and the efforts that you're making to reach every child in California. There is nothing, I mean, I do a lot of, some of you probably read, I do a lot of hard bills, a lot of bills dealing with lethal force and police officers. And, you know, I take on all these groups that are difficult and I fight those battles. But there's no battle more important to me than the education of our children in California. It is extremely important to me that we change what we're doing, that it's hard work, but the results are so amazing. And if we don't do it, then we should be ashamed of ourselves. You know, I started teaching when I was 5 years old on my mother's back porch. That's how much I like to see people learn and to look in their face and see the light come on. And I have spent 40 years at the university as a professor, working with young people, not only those who were on task, but those who needed extra assistance, those who the system had failed, who could barely write when they came to my class. And I spent some of my summers working with 4 athletes who needed to improve their skills. They were bright, they were brilliant, but the system had failed them. And they came from all over the United States. And I had a dean who told me, you can't do that, that's against the union rules. So he wrote me this letter telling me that I couldn't do it because it was against the rules because I wasn't being paid. I was chair of a department, I could do what I want in the summer. And so I just took his letter and put it in the trash. He knew that. And he called to verify, he said, did you get my letter? I said, yes, I did. He said, okay, that's all I have to do is make sure you got the letter. But I'm so proud of those young men and women who worked with me that weekend, that summer. Because one now is in charge of, he's a dean of students in New Orleans, and working hard for kids who are like him, kids left out, left behind, kids who suffered trauma early in life, who had very little support other than his coach, his football coach, and a 3rd grade teacher who followed him all the way to San Diego State and came to his graduation. So I know that it makes a difference when we care, when we spend some time figuring out what the key is to the life of our kids, to open that door, to make it happen for them. I know it will happen for me. You know, I'm a child of a sharecropper out of Hope, Arkansas. And my father left the South barely with a 5th or 6th grade education because they were going to lynch him, because he stood up for himself as a sharecropper at the way station and refused to allow himself to be cheated. But he always dreamed of education. And he always told me that he would drink muddy water and sleep in a hollow log if I want to go to school. And he meant every word of that. And so I know that it changed my life. It changed the trajectory of my life, my sisters, my brothers, all of us who lived in the Pueblos and the projects of Los Angeles. It changed our lives, and it can change the life of every kid in the state if we care enough. And I always tell folks, I care about every kid in the state. There is no child that's disposable. My mother had 8 kids, and she never considered 50% good enough. She never said, well, 4 of them are reading and 4 can't. That's okay for me. Oh, heck no. All of us had to read. All of us had to do math. She was a mother, and 100% was what she counted on. And I think all of us do the same thing. We count on 100% in our families. And I always tell folks, if it's not good enough for Kadir and Jaleel, my grandsons, it's not good enough for anybody else. Because they live in a world where they have to care about other people. And this is a part of it. So I'm excited about it. I heard the presentation this morning, and I thought it was amazing. And because the person is talking about what we know is best. Get to know our kids. Get to see who they are. Reach them where they are, and they will come to where you are. And that's just a simple message that all of us believe and know so well. So I'm excited about being here this morning. I'm going to be around for a while, watching what you do. I'm even fascinated by all this little stuff on the table. I don't know what it is, but it's the kind of stuff I collect from conferences. I have a mound of it in my house, and my son keeps saying I should throw all this stuff away. And I go, well, at one point, I'm going to read some of this stuff, you know. And years later, you know. But nonetheless, thank you so very much for what you're doing. I just want you to know that way down in San Diego, somebody cares about what you're doing. And I do my best to carry the message to Sacramento, to all of my colleagues, that this is the most important work that we will do. If we can focus on the climate, and we can say we're going to reach certain goals by 2020, and we reach those goals by 2018, surely we can focus on the fact that every kid in the state of California should meet standards. Every child. And that should be our mantra, and we should set a date for when it's going to happen, because we do it with everything else. You know, we can save the planet, we can save the world, and still lose our children at the same time, and that is unacceptable. Not in California, not on our watch, and we should be vigilant about it. So once again, thank you for taking your time, and I hope this is infectious, that it grows and it spreads like everything throughout California, and I will do my best to make sure that I support it, and my colleagues do too. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. We're honored to have her with us today. And it's my next great pleasure to introduce Dr. Richard Villa, who has already been here once for one of our conferences, but he came back. 2016, if you want to go on our website, you can see his presentation then. You're wearing a different outfit. Sometimes that happens. And so we're delighted to have him here. He's going to do an engaging presentation on co-teaching and inclusive practices. But I want you to know that since about 2015, we have been using his inclusive education checklist with the Inclusion Collaborative, and we have at least one site that I can see. Actually, multiple sites have used this. It's a self-assessment. We love it. It's a really easy way for folks to determine the inclusive needs within their site, and it's done in a really positive fashion with lots of research. We love that too. And so I encourage you to look at the Inclusive Education Checklist. And then what just came out was, so exciting, the Inclusive Education Checklist for Early Childhood. So we have another Birth to 5 tool to check for inclusion, I know. And so, and it just came. I mean, it's hot. It's steaming. I did write my name in it, so don't think about stealing it, anybody. So it's my great pleasure to have Dr. Rich Villa come up here. He is actually on vacation also. I didn't know that that's what I do to people. And he is going to share with us all of his knowledge of, what, 40 plus years?
A long time.
A long time. We're just honored to have Dr. Rich Villa with us. Thank you. Check, check. Does it work?
We're good. Thank you, Kathy. So good morning.
Good morning.
There you go. I knew you could do that because I heard you already do that. So it is a thrill for me to have an opportunity to spend some time with you. So they've asked me to talk about co-teaching and in the context of inclusive practice. In the schedule, you do have a paper handout, that's digitally available to you for now or later. You'll see some slides that'll come up with a page reference. It's speaking to that handout. Before I get started, I want to draw your attention to the website, ravillabayridge.com. If you go to that handout and you go to presentations, there is even more material on co-teaching. But there's also material on inclusive practices, on differentiation of instruction, systems change, etc. Please know you are welcome to take, copy, use, share any of the handout material that is there. You can even claim you authored it if that works for you. So, Co-teaching within the context of inclusive practice makes me want to begin with a definition of inclusive education from two of my favorite authors. So it's worse than it looks at first blush, although some of you already know. The other name listed there is Thousand, and Jackie Thousand is Professor Emerita at Cal State San Marcos. She's also my wife and colleague, and she is co-author of the books that Kathy was referencing. But for years, we have said that inclusive education is both the practice and a vision of welcoming, valuing, empowering, and supporting the diverse academic, social, emotional, communication, and language learning of all students in shared environments and experiences for the purpose of attaining the goals of education. Children need to feel welcomed to the school, to the classrooms. They need to feel valued. Valuing will never come from a focused upon perceived deficit within our children and youth. Valuing comes from discovering who they are, right? We heard a fair amount about that in the beginning keynote, but it's getting to also understand their assets, their talents, their learning profiles, and using that. It has to be about empowerment, choice, and it must always be about support, not dump and hope. How does co-teaching fit in with that? Because instead of just dumping children into a room, you are bringing additional support can support that child and the other students in the room. We're concerned with the total development of our children and youth, academic, social, emotional, right? We're concerned with their communication, language development. And it is not just about children who carry particular labels. This is about all children and youth in shared environments and shared experiences, and not simply because it's nice, but because we believe it will better enable them to achieve the desired goals or outcomes of education. We have 45 years of research and experience that demonstrates that children with disabilities have better academic, social, and communicative gains in general ed environments than they do in resource rooms, special day class, and special schools. Not only do we know that there's greater learning now, we know from the Department of Education that there's greater quality of life in their adult years. Their quality of life, as measured by happiness, friendship, self-esteem, and employment, increases in direct proportion to the amount of time they spend in general education classrooms when they are with us. I want to share this conceptual framework that Jackie and I call the schoolhouse model. And it really is part of a multi-tiered system of support. But if inclusive education is the goal, meaning access and success for all students, it doesn't just happen overnight. So for us, there are various initiatives that come together that lead us to that place and are complementary to one another. Certainly differentiating instruction, a response to intervention when we're looking at data, making decisions about how to organize our human resources and the kinds of supports children need, but first of all, making sure we firm up tier one. We put co-teaching on that same floor because it's about, again, how we utilize our human resources. What we know is that co-teaching, RTI, differentiation, and inclusion all require collaborative planning and problem solving. And that is the reason why that is on that first floor. But the foundation to all of that has to be administrative support, leadership, articulation of a vision, building consensus for a vision, marshaling our resources, allocate, reallocate staff, professional development, right? Cheerleading as we go through that process. So in that schoolhouse model, the foundation is administrative leadership and support, us having time and processes to engage in collaboration and creativity is the first floor. Our second floor is database decision-making. How do we allocate our resources, provide supports to children? With this information in mind, we plan to purposely differentiate instruction to enable us to reach the top floor, access and success for all. In the time I have with you, I am mostly going to be talking about the co-teaching because that's what I was asked to speak about. But I want to talk about it within the context of implementation science. Implementation science is we're studying how scientific knowledge, principles, and practices are actually being used or not used in the real world. We're identifying the contextual factors that affect people's ability to use the practices that are recommended. And it's developed as a result of many years of observing the gap between what we know from the research and what's really happening. And it's across a variety of fields, including education. Cognitive factors related to the successful use of best practices. Professionals need to receive training. The training's got to include coaching and performance-based feedback. The organization has a responsibility to provide those administrative supports and infrastructures for that ongoing coaching to occur. Communities and consumers need to be involved, engaged in choosing specific strategies and practices. And federal, local funding streams, regulations need to create the environment. So with that in mind, look at the research from Joyce and Showers. And this research has been done since the 80s, and it still comes out pretty much the same way. How much time have we spent in professional development, in-service, staff development, and that gap between what people learn and what actually happens is huge. But we know if they're getting the knowledge, but they see demonstrations, they have opportunities for guided practice with feedback, but coaching in the real world, we get the transfer into the classroom. I've had the good fortune to work, as Kathy was pointing out, on facilitating inclusive visions and practices for 40+ years. The places that I know that make the systemic change often include this as part of it because they want to make sure that it isn't just knowledge that is here, but is beneficial to our children and youth. For us, and again, I'm referring to Jackie, my wife and colleague, we define co-teaching as two or more people who share responsibility for teaching all the students assigned to a classroom. We differ with some of our colleagues who are other authors in co-teaching. So, first of all, we use the term people, where other authors may say it's always between two licensed certified professionals. We believe that that is not depictive of what really happens in our nation's classrooms, and it also delimits our thoughts of the resources available to us. We believe pretty much anybody can be a co-teacher. Obviously, can two general education teachers co-teach? Could a special educator and a general educator co-teach? An English learning specialist and a gen ed teacher? What about related service personnel like speech and language? Teacher librarians? Can paraeducators co-teach? Certainly. Now, we would advocate that they receive training and support in doing this. What about students? We believe that students are the untapped resource. Let me test my hypothesis. What is it that children say every day at the end of the day when they go home and we ask, what did you do in school today? And the answer is? Nothing. Nothing. Ding, ding. Take a ride on the Clue bus. Or as my daughter Rebecca once said, buy a dog, name it Clue, and then you'll have one. Oh, it was funny. It's funny today, but it wasn't when she said it. Right? But we're being told by those students that they view what they're doing as nothing. When students are in real, formal, cooperative group learning, they're your co-teachers. If you have trained peer tutors, they are your co-teachers. And we have worked with high schools where we've had up to 50 high school students enroll in a 3-credit course in co-teaching, and later they are paired across grades 9 through 12 with adult co-teachers. Phenomenal resource for us. So we believe that it's two or more. More often than not, it is two. But we want to say two or more, once again, to not delimit our view of potential resources. They share responsibility for teaching all the students. When we say teaching, we're talking about the complete instructional act. They co-plan, they teach, they reflect, they assess, they grade together. They teach all the students, so it's not these are mine and those are yours. What we know about co-teaching is that it requires trust, communication, coordination of effort, and common planning time. Many people fail to achieve the potential benefits of co-teaching because they do not have trust, they haven't figured out the communication, they're not coordinating the effort, and they either do not have or they do not hold sacred the common planning time. Co-teaching is like a committed partnership. How is that so? Co-teaching can be like a marriage or an ongoing committed partnership. In what ways? Here you can talk to me. It gets lonely if you just look at the audience and talk. Yes, sir.
We share the responsibility of connecting with the students in the room, and by students, I mean all students in the room.
Okay, so you share responsibility to connect with, to have a relationship with, just as in a marriage, if you have children, you share that responsibility. Do all marriages in the real world have children? No, but do our co-teaching marriages have children? Yeah. Lots of them. Yes. Communication is essential. What else? See, this is newlywed advice. Now you listen.
Your strengths and weaknesses can complement one another.
All right, we're people. We're going to have certain strengths, certain weaknesses, and sometimes we can complement each other. Yes.
Sometimes you wake up in the morning and you don't really like that person.
Sometimes there are disagreements, but
By the end of the day, you fall back in love with
hopefully we'll fall back in love. Yes.
It requires regular commitment, and you're always trying to put a good face on that relationship.
Okay. Commitment, that positive mindset. The attribution is of positive intent on the part of that person. In many ways, our co-teaching marriages are indeed like this. The most frequently occurring co-teaching partnership is that of a gen ed teacher and a special educator. However, rapidly catching up are general ed teachers co-teaching with English learning specialists. There are 4 predominant approaches to co-teaching. And you have a graphic organizer in your packet that allows for note-taking around similarities, unique features, advantages, and cautions. That language may be a little different than what you may have heard from other authors in co-teaching. I can take all of their approaches and fit them into the 4. But we have used this language since the mid-90s because it's the result of the National Inclusion Survey that went out to the schools that were doing a great job, asked them, how come it works for you? One of the things that came up again and again was co-teaching, and they identified these 4 approaches in that research. One of the most important things for you to understand is that there is a time and a place for all of those approaches, right? So let's explore them a little bit. We already know in terms of similarity, they all fit within our definition. 2 or more people sharing responsibility for educating all the students assigned to a classroom. And whether it is supportive, parallel, complementary, or team, it requires trust, communication, coordination, and common planning. I will say, as you move across that page, from supportive, getting over to team, the amount of trust, the amount of communication, the amount of coordination, and the amount of planning increases, which is why some people tend to be stuck on supportive and or supportive with parallel. So let's look at supportive. This is an easy one to visualize. In supportive co-teaching, one person's leading the large group, and the other person or persons are out and about among the students. What are advantages of one in lead and one in support? Because they all have potential advantages, they all have potential cautions. Who leads, who supports doesn't have to be a static event. You can alternate. Anybody have an advantage for me?
Well, one person's leading, the other person's filtering and seeing where there might be miscues or misunderstandings to be able to let the other person.
All right, so the person in lead is focused on the whole, but the person or persons out and about are going to see things that are not readily visible to the person in lead. They can gather information that they can feed back to that lead person in the moment or later. What else? What else? Yes.
I have to stop and
Okay.
We have virtual people here.
I repeat what they say.
Well, we still like to.
Okay. While she's doing that,
Managing behaviors, like if you have classroom behaviors that.
managing behaviors. So one of the things she's saying is, not to mention any names, some people might behave better with a little physical proximity. What else? What else? Okay. What else? Any others? Yes. Get multiple, because you're.
This is great for steps. I love it.
I was gonna say you're an expert in your lesson because you've had time to really plan and develop, but it might not be available for both.
Okay, so you have some expertise that you can complement or add to what the other person's doing, and that person leading may not have planned for both. So when we look at supportive, the advantages are that the person out and about can observe and see things not necessarily readily available. They can collect data. They can provide on-the-spot academic or behavioral support. Are there children who do not want to ask questions in a large group? So they have someone that they can ask. Now, turn to a neighbor and tell them what you think might be the disadvantages or problems of supportive co-teaching. Talk to somebody by you.
It's okay.
I'll do less of it because I'll lose the time.
Okay.
Yeah,
Your voice is good?
My
Got a
voice.
cough drop if you need it?
it'll work. And finish up that thought. If you can hear my voice, clap one time. Can hear my voice, clap 2 times. Thank you. Great way to get attention, cheap way to steal applause. How many of you said something along the lines of you can breed resentment among members of the co-teaching team? Over the years, not as much now as in the early days, but over the years I've had hundreds of interventionists who would say, I hate co-teaching. And we'd say, why? And they'd say, well, because the classroom teacher teaches, and while they teach, I kind of go around like this, making sure everybody's on the right page. Now, you understand why I had to go to graduate school to be able to do this. Is this the best use of my skill set? And the answer has to be no. There's a time and a place for it. Oftentimes, as the class, when the co-teachers come together initially, they get to know one another, the children, the curriculum, the routine. There'll be children coming in who need assistance with transition. So we're still going to be doing it, but we don't think it gives you the best. That sense of resentment, if I'm in a room and I'm in somewhere between 800 to 1,000 different classrooms a year, I'm always reminding myself, do not judge. Because this is a snapshot. Those folks leave a video. They have a before, they have an after. You don't know the cast of characters. But it doesn't mean I don't wonder. So if I see, let's say, a special educator in supportive, the question in my head is, are they always in this supportive role? If the answer to that is yes, then my wondering is, where is the special education? By definition, it is specially designed instruction. This, sit up, turn the page, get out your materials. That's not specially designed instruction, right? On the other side of it, I've heard resentment from gen ed teachers. You can't depend upon them to show up, first of all. Second, when they come in late, actually sometimes they're disruptive. That was a great game the other night, yeah. And before the class is over, they're gone again. Why do I want to plan to do something when I can't depend upon this person to be there on time to do their part? So how do you call it co when I have to do all the planning, all the teaching, all the grading? So be careful about resentment. There's another caution, and that caution is avoid at all costs creating hovercraft vehicle around individual people, Velcroing teachers to individual students. Why? When we interview typical children, they tell us that if an adult is Velcroed to a child, it is a barrier to their desire to socially interact with that child. Our responsibility, first and foremost, is to promote independence. Are there going to be learners who cannot be independent, who need help? The first level of help or support should be from peer. You two talk it over, see if you're in agreement. Are there students for whom that level of support will be insufficient? So then it can come from an adult, but it must never just be one member of the co-teaching team. Otherwise, I am still stigmatizing this child, and I am telling that child and every other child in the room, this is not a real member of our class, right? I can sadly tell you, I've been in rooms where I've never seen the classroom teacher interact with some of the children in the room. They belong to the paraprofessional, to the special educator, to an occupational therapist, to anybody but. That's not inclusion. Let me share with you a clip of supportive co-teaching. And in supportive co-teaching, right, again, there's always going to be a time and a place for it. I'm always indebted to anybody who lets me into their classroom. I am doubly indebted to anybody who lets me into their classroom with a film crew. So we have a couple of moments from a classroom in San Diego back a few years ago, middle level math. You will meet Stephen and Stephanie. Stephen is a gen ed teacher, Stephanie is a special educator. As you meet them, they've only been working together for 6 weeks. There are 33 children in the room. They speak 6 different primary languages, and 7 members of that class are students who have IEPs. What do you see as supportive?
So I'll read it for you, and you can read it as well. But I want you to answer the 2 questions. What is measurement? And what does it mean to measure? So those are 2 questions I want you to think about. Get your own ideas out. If there's still some time, we'll have you discuss at your table. So Faduma, when you give me what you're going to give me what you measured, and then the value that goes along with it. And you can even pick up the book and show me.
I measured this algebra 1 book, and it was 21 millimeters.
Okay, it was 21 millimeters. Where? Up, down, left, right, diagonal, inside, outside. Okay, show the class what you did. Actually, imagine that I am asking you to do it again. So get this skinny under a ruler, and then show us what you did. It doesn't matter which one, does it?
Yeah,
I don't know.
it was bigger and smaller.
Was how long?
Wait. 28.
28
millimeters.
millimeters. Okay, somebody else.
You know it.
Write it down. Write down what you think the question was. We'll give you about 20 more seconds, and then we're going to have you share at your table.
What is everyone going to do?
Yeah, because you know what Mr. Santana's going to do.
He's going to be like, why?
He's going to be like, why?
I don't know why.
What? Why?
Because positive 5, actually, what's your positive number? 5. And 8, what's your positive number? 8. And negative 2, what's your positive number? Positive 2. Negative 7, what's your positive number? Positive 7.
I'm not going to argue with that, but just be ready to defend your answer because you know he's going to ask you. Does Richard know? Was he in agreement?
Are you in agreement?
So can I put an absolute bar of affinity?
Yeah. No.
Yes, maybe.
No. You have 1.
Indication that I'm doing
You're
the
trying to take
opposite
4
operation
positives
anyway.
away. How many positives do
I
you
want
have
to
to
know
take
what
away?
the operation is in the
I'll just take them away.
and what drops on the left side. X. Now we're going to draw a picture here.
Okay, take a moment, process your thoughts, reactions, comments, likes, etc. with your table mates, with folks you're seated with out there in that virtual world.
He was the sped teacher, right?
He was the gen ed teacher, math. And finish up that thought. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. So, as people watch that and we debrief, there are two concerns that always come up. One of the concerns that people talk about is they don't like the moment when Stephanie says, you know what Mr. Santana's going to ask, because they feel that she's putting herself in this subordinate position, right? And implying it's not our class, he is the teacher. But what's fascinating to me is people have three different takes of that. Some people have that perception, and other people have, I've heard two other perspectives when she was doing that. Anybody have a different take?
I think she was just trying to re-engage them to the task. I think she was just trying to re-engage them to the task of what his expectations were.
Okay. So some people will say, similarly to this, that good for her. It's just 6 weeks in. She's got a sense of the routines of the class. She's trying to get those kids focused for that. Does it relate to this comment, or is it a different one?
No, relates to this.
Okay.
I thought they were very in tune, that she has a very good understanding of his teaching style and was redirecting the student appropriately to prepare them for what they were going to be asked.
Okay, so now I have to tell you, again, I'm in the room. I'm trying not to make a judgment, right? But I will tell you, my shoulders did an involuntary jump. When I heard her say, you know what Mr. Santana's going to ask, it was a jump in terms of why wouldn't that language be, you know what we expect, you know what we ask, because language matters very much. But then it's like, wait, be tentative. And when we met, I asked her, I said, Stephanie, do you think that in that moment you put yourself in this subordinate position? And she said, no, I knew the next part of the lesson was that Stephen was going to call on them. I know those kids need additional time. And did you notice she withheld the answer? She didn't say you're right or you're wrong. She said, I'm not going to say if you're right or not. Have you discussed it with Richard? Talk to Richard. I do know in their planning, he is a student that they were concerned about. They know he is particularly responsive to that peer-to-peer interaction, so they purposely facilitated it, right? So again, it's just snapshots. And we cut it to show that because we want to be able to remind people that the languaging, though, does matter. We, us, our versus I and me. Do you have both names on papers that go home, on the door, right? How do you refer to each other? Kids see all of it. I love talking to children in school. The things that they tell me, Mr. So-and-so, he doesn't do too much. He kind of hangs out by the document projector. Ms. So-and-so, you can tell she wants to say a lot, but she's never given a chance to speak, right? So they see all of it. They see all of it. The other thing that some people will say about this is, isn't that distracting? It won't interrupt, right? So I hear that a lot. If you think it's distracting for your kids, ask them. But if they've never experienced a person out and about in supportive, do not ask them week 1, week 2, week 3, right? Because it's new and novel, they'll pay attention. I've had many a child say, I actually like, because I understand better the way she's explaining it, right? And the other part is, are they missing content? She is not doing that supportive role when he's introducing new content. He is doing another problem, another example. The child did not understand the procedure. He got the first one wrong. So she's in there helping him get back on track. I have some people who say, that's okay, I'd still rather wait until the mini lesson's done, then the two of us will go out and be among them. And then I have other people who are like, are you out of your mind? Those kids are not getting it. You want them to sit there for 15 minutes, frustration building, and now I have behavior, when in a minute we can get them back on track. It is important that our co-teachers talk about, if we're doing supportive, when do we do it? Also, to plan for starting to exchange some of those roles. So I have a project that I've been involved with for 6 years in Kansas. And it is a statewide project. And at this point, we're in 105 school districts. We've had increased inclusion, increased student achievement, and increased use of student-centered practices in teaching. And I wanted to share a little bit of that result, particularly as it relates to supportive, and it relates to what I was saying in implementation science, the performance-based feedback. So we had 700 classroom observations. You see co-teaching occurred in a lot of places, but what are the two primary areas? Language arts and math. Why? What are primary areas of eligibility? And where's our greatest pressure for high-stakes testing? So we see that occurring in language arts and math more than other subject areas, but we do see it in other subject areas. So here's an interesting thing, because as you're collecting this data, you don't know what it's going to show. But what we found this pattern. If they just did supportive, right, 40% of the time they were being very specific in how they taught the academic and behavioral procedures, routines. But if they did supportive plus one of the others, parallel complementary team, it went up to 60%. If in that single observation they were using 3 of the approaches, it was at 7 to 8. But if they were using all 4 approaches, 97% of them were being specific in how they were teaching the academic and behavioral routines and procedures. What surprised us was that pattern held true. If we were looking at the provision of prompts and cues, the more approaches used, the greater the provision of prompts and cues. Specificity of feedback, same pattern. This is where you are, this is the goal, this is where you are, here's your next step, and again, here are some cues and prompts. Checking for understanding, not are there any questions, but having students say, do, demonstrate something. More approaches used, the greater the checking for understanding we observed. If you think of using a variety of multiple intelligences, in this case, let's look at Gardner's 8 multiple intelligences. More approaches used in a single period, the more intelligences were used to deliver content and to let kids make sense of it and show you what they knew. Positive behavior supports also increased. Training makes a difference. If neither co-teacher is trained, all we saw was supportive. If only one member of the partnership was trained, we got a little bit more than supportive. But in our 700 observations, if both teachers had been trained, 96% of the time we saw them moving in and out of the 4 approaches. Why? Because they knew what they're expected to do, right? So there are a lot of people who are put in co-teaching, go do it. That's not necessarily going to increase achievement. Co-teaching is so much more than putting 2 people in a room who learn how to play nicely together. It's what are they doing in the name of instruction, facilitating access, scaffolding, and supports. So let's go to the next approach, parallel. Of the 4 approaches to co-teaching, this is the only one that is not large group instruction. In parallel co-teaching, the members of the co-teaching team are each focused on a subset of the class at the same time. Now, I have a group, you have a group. They can be the same size or dissimilar in size. We can be doing the same thing in the same way, or in that case, we're just simply dividing and conquering. Or we could be learning and focused on the same standard, but we're teaching it in a different way, using different modalities. You can have students rotate to the co-teachers, or the co-teachers can rotate to the students. As I said, this is the only one that is not large group instruction. Therefore, it lends itself to the greatest degree of differentiation. In your handout on page 7, there are 7 faces of parallel co-teaching that are described. Again, all of them have advantages and disadvantages. At your table, get your microphone ready. At your table, what are the potential advantages of parallel co-teaching, What are potential hazards, cautions? You have all the time in the world you need to discuss this. You have 1 minute. We mentioned it's on the schedule. Well, we're done with that. Just like any group, some people listen. How many times you'll ask a question, someone will say it. They can hear it. It gets repeated, and then somebody's in the same or gives the same answer. It's like the real world. Keeps life exciting. It's what kids do all the time. I will need more. Okay. And finish up that thought. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So, since I'm enjoying my interaction with you, I like you, or most of you, let's just add another signal to pull you back. And this one requires you to finish a phrase. How does this phrase end? Goodness gracious. If you hear me say goodness gracious, you must respond with enthusiasm, and do not forget the enthusiasm, great balls of fire. Are we ready? Practice. Goodness gracious. Great balls of fire. And did all you people out there do this too? Okay. Tell me. Let's start with advantages. Anybody know an advantage of parallel?
Ready.
You've got one here too. You can be ready.
This type of co-teaching leverages the teacher's strengths. So specifically, I've seen it in primary where one teacher is an animated phonemic awareness teacher and is engaging students with songs, and the other teacher is a really good guided reading instructor, and there's a natural rotation happening, and they're leveraging their strengths.
Beautiful, thank you. Another advantage?
With station learning centers, it just allows for more intensive differentiation because you're focusing on small or targeted groups.
And as students come to a particular center or station, it doesn't mean they all do the same thing in every rotation. You can differentiate, right, within your center for different students that are going to be coming through. Is it easier or more difficult to establish a relationship in a small group? So we have greater ease of relationship, more guaranteed airtime for children, easier to monitor their progress. A caution, even if it is a teacher-directed group, it shouldn't be all teacher talk. You want to have moments where you facilitate peer-to-peer student talk. Why? Because whoever does the talking does the learning. Whoever does the talking makes connection. Way too much teacher talk. We've got to have more student-to-student discourse. Any other advantages?
Raise your hand.
For that progress monitoring, easy to do. But boy, whenever I think of parallel co-teaching, I have huge flashing caution lights. What do you think are potential problems? Yes?
When the other teacher doesn't have the same content knowledge that you do.
All right, so if we do not have the same level of content mastery, I've got to be thoughtful about what it is you're doing in your center or station, who teaches what. All right, what else?
When the groups are not equally distributed.
And what do you mean by the groups not being equally distributed?
So if you were to pull groups apart based on, okay, the ELs and special ed kids go off here and, yeah.
Okay, so last table back there has one. That was the one you were going to do?
Same thing.
Yeah, I hate when she steals people's ideas. This to me is one of the major cautions. Do not create a special class within a class. We work very hard in education, but sometimes we work within structures that research says are counterproductive. The research says if you primarily group children of low ability with other children of low ability in a gen ed classroom, You might depress their achievement by as much as 24 percentile points. Did I just say you can't have a group for remediation, you can't have a group for enrichment? Is that what I just said? No. Being placed in a group is not a life sentence. It is fluid, it is flexible, it is data-based. We group, regroup for a variety of purposes. I may pull you and have a teacher-directed group, but I'll get the best results if I now have you interact with some children, right, within a heterogeneous pairing or group, so that students can oftentimes learn it better and practice it with peers who have it. The other caution is you do not want to always have one member of the team work with the children who are struggling in learning, right? To your point, I have gone into rooms where here are the children who have IEPs, here are the English learners, here are Title I students, you guys don't have a label but you're still crows, and then here are my eagles, right? No, every child who shares a common label is not the same as every other child. It's got to be fluid, it's got to be flexible. Let me share with you a parallel co-teaching clip, and this one will come from Wheeling. And as a point of reference, when I mentioned handout, if you didn't hear me say it earlier, you have one electronically available to you, right? And that's where you're seeing page numbers. This is a 4th grade class, Wheeling, Illinois, about 30 minutes from O'Hare. You've got a learning coach co-teaching with a 4th grade teacher.
We're going to set the timer for 2 minutes. So you have 2 minutes to explore on your own, okay? And that is going to start right now.
And moving forward, you will be kind of collecting ideas. So think about all the ideas that you'll be listening to right now. That's very important because you'll be taking those great ideas for the next activity, okay? So be really good listeners.
And before we start, if you get stuck and you're not sure like what external structure it could represent, we have our poster back there, so you can refer to our structures to help you if you need to. Okay? Are you ready? Yes. Okay, go ahead and go.
When I grab a little, this. I got this one. When I was looking at this,
There's a sentence frame on the outside the box. He's trying to get them to use it.
And I know that animals need eyes to see, so I was. Oh, this object can represent the external structure of an eye. This structure can help the organism survive by food because the eye can help it find food.
Remind me, what structure did you say it would represent? The eye. Okay, so it would help protect, and how would it help it protect?
By looking and seeing predators.
Okay, interesting. Ready, set? Okay, boys and girls, if you can once again put the container in the center of your table. Okay, awesome. Ms. Ryder, I heard a lot of good conversations from the groups that I visited.
I did as well.
Okay, and it looked like everyone was using the sentence frame too, and even if you started your sentence, you remembered, oh man, I gotta use that. So that was really great. Raise your hand if you heard a new idea that you hadn't thought of before from your group members. Okay, good, almost all of us. So now what we're going to do is we are going to put you in your animal groups so you can hear even more ideas from other people not at your tables.
So, did you notice anything a little different about the roles of those teachers in that? Were they directly teaching? Were they directly teaching? No. So they were monitoring. So I wanted to show you that clip because one of the things that you can do in parallel is to monitor students as they work alone, partnered, or grouped. However, we would like you to do it the way they've done it. They're very explicit. They tell the children, today during this activity, I'm going to watch over this side of the room. Ms. Hernandez is going to watch over this side of the room. Why? What we witness when we get to observe is that if the teachers are in free float, they're not attending to where each other has been. So some groups are over-monitored, some are under-monitored. I was in a middle-level science classroom in Connecticut. A really effective team of a gen ed teacher, special educator, and a paraeducator. It was in a science class. The kids had great collaborative skills as well. They were engaged in formal cooperative group learning. And the only thing that was a little problematic to me was watching them monitor the students. Because these kids are working and in comes one of the teachers. How's it going? Everybody participating? You all understand what you're doing? They left. A nanosecond later, in comes the special educator. Now, you all have the roles. You know what your role is. You're rotating the roles, right? The paraeducator's learning from their model. Then she comes in because this must be what you're supposed to do. And it's like, leave them alone. When children work well together, educators get very lonely. No one's heard my voice. Let me show them how important I am to their life. Let me inflict myself upon them. I have the easy job of watching. But what I'll watch is oftentimes they're working as a group, but the person ends up with a conversation with one that's pulling them away from the group. When you feel like intervening, try not to. If you have to, do it with a question like Stephanie did in the first clip. I'm not going to say if you're right or not, but have you all discussed it? Are you in agreement? I will be back, right? So what were they doing as they observed groups? Collecting data. If you collect data, it also gives you something to do, so you don't bother. You know, every question in my scenario, every question they asked, if they just stood back and watched, they would have had the answer. So we say, wow, you're going to get all kinds of data. And it's easier because I know I'm going to monitor these 4 groups. My colleague monitors those 5 groups. And we don't always monitor the same groups. We're going to switch. All right. So, somewhere I left my reel. Oh, here it is, real mouse. All right. Let's go to complementary co-teaching. It is our 3rd approach. It takes us back to large group instruction. It's called complementary co-teaching because about once every 5 minutes you turn to your colleague and you say things like, nice hair, great shoes. You are the smartest person I have ever worked with. Frequently, publicly, you compliment each other. Nah. There's nothing wrong with that, although I'd rather have you frequently, publicly compliment your children. But it means something different, right? Because that kind of compliment, nice hair, would have an I after the L. We have an E. It is to complete. It is to add to. It is to supplement. Here, you have both people teaching the large group, but it's going to be very clear to you, one of them is driving the content, but the other is doing something to make it more accessible. So, if I had a co-teacher with me to do this presentation, maybe they would say, I don't feel as comfortable, as facile with the information as you do. What's one of your main goals? I want them to understand the advantages and disadvantages of each of the 4 approaches, right? They develop a graphic organizer. Prior to my beginning instruction, they pass it out. While I am teaching, they model filling it in, note-taking. The development, the explanation, the modeling is complementary. If they provide additional examples, analogies, if they provide visuals, if they develop sentence frames, anchor charts, pre-teach, abstract vocabulary, idioms, figurative language, create a word wall. All of those are examples of complementary behaviors that facilitate access. So, can you see advantages here? One of the biggest advantages for me is that if you have a content teacher and an interventionist, they're both using their skills for the benefit of all, right? Both look like real teachers in the eyes of the students. Cautions. What do you think might be a problem or disadvantage? Turn to a neighbor quickly. What could go wrong here? What might be a problem? And finish up that thought. Goodness gracious. Nah, that was pitiful. Goodness gracious. Much improved, thank you. Okay, a disadvantage you've identified.
Raise your hand if you want to talk.
When I did this, I felt like there were times where I was putting in a lot of work to create visuals and like the supportive pieces when the gen ed teacher knew the content, so it wasn't as much collaboration as it was me figuring out the content and then supporting that, so kind of like that resentment piece.
Okay,
again.
so it was, you felt that you had that sole responsibility. Okay, you come up with all the scaffolds, all the supports, all the visuals. It wasn't shared. What else?
Anyone? We're ready.
Right here.
What?
And then we have one over there. Here, then there, and then we have one there.
We limit the grit of each teacher so they get stuck in the same role so they don't develop their teaching overall, not only as co-teachers, but also as teachers, period.
Good. So you don't want to get stuck, right? Now, if you're introducing new content and one clearly has the content mastery, and the further up the grades we go, the more this is an issue, the other person can still benefit the instruction by thinking about what kinds of supports might I need if I were learning this, using those access strategies. But there's going to come a point in time when you feel comfortable enough. Now we're at a point where we're going to review this kind of information, and there'll be other things that maybe you are more confident and have content knowledge with. We don't want you to get stuck in just those roles.
I was going to say two things. Well, there's
there's only one to a customer.
Okay,
No.
so there's the trust to be able to share the same stage, because in a parallel setting, you're one person may be monitoring this side of the room and the other person's on this side, and they've already had those conversations. So there's trust. I have to trust you because I'm sharing the stage, and I have to trust you. You're not going to overtalk me, but also I have to have those collaborative conversations beforehand with you to know what you're going to talk about, so I can create any visual supports, because that's going to take some time too.
So thank you. Her 2 points are very important. Remember, I said as you go from supportive to parallel to complementary to team, the amount of trust, the amount of communication, the amount of coordination, the amount of planning, having the collaborative conversations increase, which is why some people don't tend to get to these other approaches. And where were we? We had another one.
Student perception of the teacher's role, because we may have just one teacher voice
Right. So, well, in complementary, we get to hear two voices, but they have different roles. But we do have to be thinking about, do the students view both as real teachers? And was there one more? Visual hallucination, a child of the 50s, 60s, whatever. Okay. So the ones that we worry about, beware of too much teacher talk. Because, you know, now I'm so excited because I get to be on the big stage. And I was in supportive, I had my small group, but now I'm up here. So beware of too much teacher talk. You have to figure out how to do this so you don't step on each other's toes, right? So that's part of that planning. What we say initially, if you haven't done it, think of 3 things during this lesson that can come in that will be complementary. Start there, right? Another caution is don't forget to monitor. Because in supportive, when someone's out and about, we had close monitoring. When we broke them in small groups, we could monitor. But now, we're both teaching the whole. And you do not need to both teach from the front of the room, but be thoughtful of it. I want to take you back to San Diego, and I want to have you Man Middle School. That's the school where Stephen and Stephanie are. And I want you to look at this. It's the same class, but they are engaged in complementary co-teaching. Your job, what are all the complementary things you can identify that are being done? Oh, all right, we'll do it a different way. So what'd you think of that clip? What's your job? Be specific. All the complementary things you think are being done to facilitate access.
Answer either one. What is measurement or what does it mean to measure? And Mrs. Brown will write these down. And I would prefer that you write them down as well so that way we get all these good ideas out. So I see a lot of good participation. I saw Marche's hand up. So let's go Marche, Chris, and then Penny.
Our tip would agree that a measurement is to find length and width.
All right, who are we hearing from next?
Did you notice this? Oh, good.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, she just took the initiative. I didn't even have to call her. She was ready to go like that.
Because she was paying attention.
Well, I know.
Great, love it. Okay, so finish your thought, Penny. Line up.
And see how long the object is according to the ruler?
And see, can you only use a ruler?
Nope.
No, you can use anything else that has measurement on it.
Your finger. Let's try to come up with 5 things you can use to measure something with right now. A ruler is one. You said a finger, Randy?
Cup.
A cup. Jesus? Pencil. Paper. I mean, yeah. So would it be fair to say that anything is a measuring device? Yeah. I mean, obviously, a ruler is the most traditional, but we could use anything. I mean, I could say that if I were to use pens, I could say I'm about 30 pens tall. I mean, you would be able to reference that. Open circle on -3.
And then I have another question. Why are these all positive on the left?
And Kevin, if I need the numbers that are greater than -3, which direction? To the right. All of our thoughts. So how, I like how Michael's written nice and big. How far are you away from 0? So basically, when we say how far, we're dealing with a what? When you say how far, you're dealing with a
Measurement.
Randy? Distance. And it's a distance that is associated with what number? What's the number that we're always trying to get to? 0.
So 0 is kind of like our home base.
Yes.
Right.
It's like that get out of jail card
Right,
for the
playing Monopoly. Yep, Monopoly. Good connection. So this is
this say. I'm looking for a volunteer to raise their hand. Michael? What does this say? No. What does this say?
absolute value of good.
Okay. What does it mean, Michael?
How far from zero?
Good, Michael. Good. And so, Michael, let's answer that. So if you need help, you can use your number line, you can use the number line in the back, or you might just know it. How far away, Michael, is -2 from 0? Is 5.
The absolute value of 5 is 5.
Good.
So what does this equal sign say? When you say that sentence, this is the is.
Okay. Now I'm going to switch, and I'm going to ask you, what does it mean?
How far away it is from zero.
So, John, go ahead and say it first, and then we'll take that and we'll make it to the class.
How far
from zero?
How far
But what?
5 is from 0?
So, say it again. Let's hear John, Jesus. Let's hear John.
How far is 5 from 0?
Good. So that's what it means. So how far is 5 away from 0? Your turn.
How far is 5 away from 0?
And then we should all know that. How far away is 5 from 0?
5. All right,
Okay.
number 1. Okay, so let's start right there. Go ahead, Mr. Shanigana.
Okay, so we can go ahead and list them out. Mrs. Brown will take them. What is a number that you found, and you worked with your table if you needed to, that was less than 3 away from 0? Joey, give me 1, please.
-2.
-2. Now, if we agree, we'll accept it. -1.
Would you do me a favor and stand? And if you've been sitting out there in the virtual world, stand too. Now I'd like you to find someone not seated at your table. If you don't know each other, briefly introduce yourself, not your whole life story, and share with them what did you observe that was complementary. Okay? Find a partner not at your table. More, please. And finish up that thought. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you can hear my voice, clap 1 time. If you can hear my voice, clap 2 times. Thank your partner and find your way back to a seat, please. So, thinking of that lesson that we observed, what is the number that we are always trying to get back to? Good learning. He said it, but she did many things that drove that home. Simply saying it works if you're an auditory learner. What are some of the things she did to bring that learning home? Did she not write the definition? The number we're always trying to get back to is 0. Then, where was she when I went to school? That nice, big, legible handwriting. What then did she do? The number we're always trying to get back to is 0. She put it in a box to focus attention. And then she gives us an analogy. It is like trying to go to home base. Now, she walks over to a child's paper. You do not know what she does. But on that child's paper, there's a number line, and above 0, she drew a house. So that child had concrete visual representation. This is where you're supposed to be getting back to, home base. Did you notice her paraphrasing? Did you see the visual scaffolds? And what does it say? What does it mean? She's listening to those students. The first child who he calls upon doesn't have it. She says it, the child repeats it. For other students, she's deciding, do they need that scaffold? For some students, she's just nodding her head. You may or may not have noticed above the whiteboard, there was chart paper. She created those resources. There's a bulletin board. It is a word wall. She pre-teaches the math vocabulary before the lesson. And later, as they progress in their co-teaching, they have a lot of that in the 6 main languages being used in the classroom. So kids have it in different languages as well. Did you notice any behavioral issues in this class? You saw them twice. Do you think it is an environment ripe for behavioral issues? 38 hormone-raging adolescents speaking 6 different primary languages, 7 children with IEPs. You don't see it there, but some of those students in other classes during the day are what I call frequent flyers. I accrue my frequent flyer point for air travel. They get it for office travel, but it's the support of the co-teachers. Compared to when you saw just the supportive moments, would this have required more trust, communication, coordination, and planning? Absolutely. Does Stephanie look more like a real teacher here? Is she using her skill set to influence instruction? I know her skill set. She was a graduate student of mine. She was a graduate student of Jackie's. And if I went into a room and all I ever saw her do was supportive, I'd be putting my head through the wall, right? So let's go to team, our 4th and final. And team co-teaching has people who, if you don't know their roles, and all you see is them in a team co-teaching moment, you're not going to be able to walk out and say, this was the gen ed teacher, or the interventionist, or the paraprofessional, because in that moment, they look exactly equal. In the Steve and Stephanie clip, is it still clear he's driving the content and she's making it more accessible? But in team, they're both almost simultaneously delivering content and facilitating access. We like to say that co-teaching is like a marriage. Oftentimes, it is a marriage of masters of content with masters of access. If you're at team co-teaching, you are a married couple that dances beautifully together. The dance you do is complex, sophisticated, intimate, like a good tango. It can look a bit like complementary, unless you're asking who's driving content, who's facilitating access. Clean example, if we want you to work as partners, my co-teacher and I role play it, all right? So, the advantages are you both are looking equal in the eyes of the learners. I am an access person, but I'm practicing my content with a built-in content coach. You are a content person, but you're developing and practicing the use of access skills with a built-in access coach. Ask any child in these rooms, who is your math teacher? Who is your ELA teacher? And they will mention the members of the co-teaching team. Because I like you, I'm going to share with you my favorite clip. It comes from a kindergarten in Illinois. There are 50 kindergarten children in the room. Do you think having a co-teacher in this environment might be helpful? This has with it music, so feel free to sing along, and it has total physical response. It has movement, so feel free to move and or sing. This is Christian and Erica.
Here we go, oh, seasons of the year. Here we go, oh, seasons of the year. Here we go, oh, seasons of the year. Here comes the fall with the leaves changing colors. Here comes the fall with the climate getting cooler. Here comes the fall with the leaves falling down. Here comes the fall with the wind blowing loud. Here comes the fall with the leaves changing colors. Here comes the fall with the climate getting cooler. Here comes the fall with the leaves falling down. Here comes the fall with the wind blowing loud.
Here we go.
We go, oh.
Come on.
Seasons of the year, here we go, oh. Seasons of the year, here we go, oh. Seasons of the year, here we go, oh. Seasons of the year, here comes the winter with the ice and the snow. Here comes the winter with the freezing cold. Here comes the winter with the days getting shorter. Here comes the winter with the nights getting longer.
Here comes the winter. So, we've been talking about winter a lot, right? And we've been singing this song a lot. So there's some words that we want to teach you in English that you already know in Spanish. So hay muchas palabras del invierno que ustedes ya saben. Ahora vamos a aprender lo que significa en inglés. ¿Ok?
Entonces, la primera palabra es con mucho viento, ¿ok? ¿Qué es el movimiento de mucho viento? Pues, no pueden contarme, necesitan mostrarme. Hágalo, ¿ok? ¿Cómo así? Entonces, repítenme, mucho viento.
Mucho viento.
Muy bien, y entonces necesitan mostrarme. Hay mucho viento, está soplando tan fuerte.
Mucho viento.
En inglés se llama windy, ¿ok?
Pero parece a un nombre que tenemos,
Oh,
right?
sí, parece muy similar.
Wendy, sube la mano. Her name is Wendy, but is it the same Wendy? No. This is Wendy. Show me Wendy.
Es igual que mucho viento.
Mucho viento. Wendy.
Windy, muéstrame.
Muéstrame. Wendy.
Oh, está soplando.
Muy bien.
Ok, ¿cómo se dice la palabra otra vez?
Windy.
Windy.
Guantes. Guantes. Wait, I'm sorry. What? Okay, I need someone to raise their hand to tell me because I'm old. I can't hear very well. Mareli. Gloves. Gloves. That's good, but there's another word for glove. And we read this book. Just a little tip.
I'm going to draw
What
a
can it
picture.
be? Andy, what do you think it is? Mitten, you are correct.
Very good.
Look at the drawing that Mr.
Is there a
Jogas
difference
did.
between mittens and gloves?
I think so.
there is.
What do you
Gloves are, let's see. Does anybody know the difference? Can you help me with my drawing? Yes, Edward. Say that again for me, please. Necesitas voltearte. One is mittens and one is gloves.
He's
What do you
right.
think the difference
¿Qué es la
is?
diferencia entre las dos? Oh, qué bueno. Está mostrándome. Uno tiene, ¿qué? Uno tiene dedos, ¿ok? Y la otra, ¿esos son, qué? ¿Mitones o guantes? Guantes. Guantes mejor. Y esos son, buen ejemplo, Mrs. Farias. Trato hecho.
Things you can find in the lost and found, huh?
¿Qué son esos?
Trato hecho. Good
¿Esos
job.
son mitones o guantes?
Good job.
I love showing that to high school teachers because basically they'll go, oh, thank God I teach little kids. I mean, bigger kids. But they have to remember their big kids used to look and be that cute, right? Did they look equal? Do you think they planned? Oh, yeah. Now, our cautions for team are the same as complementary. Beware of too much teacher talk. Don't forget to monitor, right? And it takes time to figure out how to do this without stepping on each other's toes. So my time with you is just about up, but I do want to share with you a few resources. But there's a couple of points I want to drive home. And one, there's a time and a place for all four. But of the four, which is the one you should use least? Supportive. If you look at the research where they are critical of co-teaching, saying it's not having much of an effect size on student learning, look at the description of what they're doing. So the goal has to be that that becomes the least utilized. All right. So in the handout, you will have these. So I will just briefly mention them. On page 8 of it, we have what we call the prenuptial conversation. There are areas you need to discuss. So you have that on page 8, but I believe I gave you on 9 and 10 a sample of what that looks like. After a prenuptial conversation, you want to come up with a nuptial agreement. And here, you list the various responsibilities, who's on your co-teaching team, and you'll see when you get to page 11, there's a code at the bottom. P for primary responsibility, S for secondary, E for equal, I for input. Because role clarification is one of our biggest issues. From Wendy Moravsky, friend and colleague, used with her permission, she developed if one is doing this, the other can be doing. So if one is lecturing, the other is modeling note-taking. Is that supportive, parallel, complementary, or team? Complementary. So you would put a C here. For optional home fun, extension, and enrichment, see if you can go through and categorize each of those approaches. Some relate to our roles in planning, some relate to our roles in teaching. You can be in supportive, parallel, complementary, and team in the teaching as well as the planning. If you are stuck or you are a new team, use our co-teaching tracking matrix, where we're asking you to keep track of what percentage of the time are we in these various approaches. Set goals. Where do you want to be by Thanksgiving, by midwinter vacation, etc. We have a variety of lesson planning tools. If you go to my website, which is on the cover of that handout, and you go to co-teaching, this is one lesson planning tool. It tends to be the one people most like of the ones that are there. For each segment of our class, what is it that we are teaching, what we're trying to achieve, our standards? What differentiated needs do certain students have at this point? Which approach are we using? What does co-teacher A do? What does co-teacher B do? And you continue through that lesson. You have that on page 19 of the electronic handout. And then there is the, are we really co-teachers? Are we really co-teacher checklist? You can do this together or you can do it individually and then share. Most of the tools that I've shared with you are tools that we developed after watching co-teaching teams struggle and saying what would have helped them. We recommend that you use them multiple times during the year to be reminded of good practice, to celebrate what you're doing, and set goals for the next step of your journey. I just want to give you some final thoughts about where we see co-teaching go wrong. Initially, of course, it is as if both members of the co-teaching team are not trained. We get the biggest bang for the buck if there is that coaching, performance-based feedback. You've got to have planning time. And at a minimum, you need 45 to 60 minutes a week in sit-down face-to-face planning. The scheduling of co-teaching and the resources is an administrative responsibility. The maximum percentage of students in any given class on an IEP. Authors in co-teaching differ about this, but no author has ever suggested you go over a third of the class. Otherwise, you're creating a scenario where you'll work hard, but you've taken away academic behavior and communication. And lastly, I want to answer this question: should co-teaching be voluntary? And to answer it, I have to do a little story called the malaria example. So several years ago, I contracted malaria. Malaria is not something you catch in the United States. So when you go to a doctor here, it's not like on their radar, right? What do I know? I never had malaria. I never saw a person with it in an active state. So I got sicker and sicker, but it was the middle of cold and flu season, so I'm assuming it's just a cold or a flu. But eventually I am hospitalized. And I will remember forever them coming in at 4 a.m. and saying, we have this figured out. You have malaria, tuberculosis, and your immune system is collapsing. Now feel free to fall asleep, right? Now, the good news was I did not have tuberculosis, my immune system did not collapse, but it was greatly weakened for a long ongoing battle with malaria. So I was in there for days with these raging fevers and all the other chills and all the other side effects. I thought about a lot of stuff. But do you think I ever once thought, what am I going to do? They said they're going to call CDC. What if the people at CDC do not volunteer to collaborate? Now, they're going to call the pharmacy and change my meds. Or I hope the people in the pharmacy are willing to volunteer to collaborate. What will I do if the doctors and the nurses on this shift are not collaborating, right? Do you think I ever thought of that? No, because I had a right to expect their collaboration in my diagnosis, my treatment, and my follow-up. And so my take on this question is, why should children and families have any less right to expect us to collaborate to do the jobs that we are paid to do? I love this profession. I meet wonderful people all the time. But I've yet to meet that teacher by himself or herself who can meet the diverse psychological and educational needs of the children sitting in front of them. Collaboration is essential to our success, but more importantly, to the children we teach and care for. I have no doubt your book of questions is bigger than my little book of answers. So avail yourself of the resources on the website, and thank you.